So Peter, I think you can lead with a brief intro then.
Okay, I'll start off now. So I'm Peter, as I introduced myself, and I work for the European Commission, more specifically DG Informatics, which is sort of like the IT department for the Commission. And we have this program called the Interoperability Solutions for Public Administration Program, ISA Square for short, which is set up by the European Commission, and the goal is to promote interoperability, meaning sort of exchange of data and cooperation between the different public administrations. And the ultimate goal of all this is the creation of digital public services. And so in order to do that, we provide different things. For example, frameworks. One of the things that we have as a framework is the European Interoperability Framework. We also provide different types of tools. So for example, one of the tools that we have are the core vocabularies. For example, how to describe uh, data sets, core vocabularies. For example, the core person, how to describe a person, core business, how to describe business, core location, how to describe a location. So that's in order to promote semantic interoperability. But we also provide different types of services. And one of these is the testbed, and the different features of the test bed, as well as the CSV validator that we created, is going to be explained a bit more by Costas, who will also show you a demo. So this is one of the things that we have been working on, and it's a service that we provide for free to different public administrations, especially to different commission services. So Costas, take it away.
Okay, good. So, I'm Peter is the project officer from Digit. I'm the lead architect. I already introduced myself briefly, so I'm going to jump in and start talking about, what I want to show you today. So it's all about focusing on table schema specifically, and what we did around conformance testing and validation using table schema. So first of all, just a couple of words about what the testbed is. So what we call the testbed, it's basically it's an online platform of both software and hardware resources with the purpose of connecting IT systems to carry out conformance testing. And the focus is specifically semantic and technical specifications. Okay, so it's not any kind of interoperability, legal, organizational, and so forth. It's really technical. And what is very important for us is that this is an environment that is online, it's accessible to all, it is intuitive, and it is meant to be used self-service. So both for the users that connect their systems for testing, this could be industry, it could be member states, for example. It's meant to be self-service for them, so they don't have to involve administrators, support staff, and so forth to actually test. But it's also self-service for the administrators, the community administrators, that use it to configure their testing strategy, their specifications, their test suites, and all the different services that they make available to their users. So it's powered by Digit, by the Commission, and the ISA program, as Peter introduced before. And the last thing you see here, I don't know if you actually see my pointer while sharing, but in any case, the last thing you see on the slide is that what we're doing is based on the CEN GATB workshop agreement. I'm not going to get into too many details about this. Just keep in mind that it is the closest thing we have to a standards-based conformance testbed. So all the components, how they interact, the language that they use, how we define tests, and so forth. It was work that was started by CEN that we in the Commission, we have continued. So I'm really boiling it down to the basics to keep the presentation part short. And with this, I'm going to really summarize the main services that we offer to users. So we have validators. This is what you see on the top. So services that are used to validate data, and what we call the complete testbed for conformance testing. This is what you see at the bottom. So with respect to validators, these are services that can be used in a fully standalone manner. They're used to validate content. You provide the content via different input channels, and you receive validation reports. The reporting is simple. It highlights all the errors. It shows you where you've made mistakes and so forth. But what is very important is that this is completely, it's a service that can be used anonymously. You don't have to connect, have an account, and so forth to use such validators. And all our validators are fully stateless. And this is a point that's very important. because sometimes testing with data and so forth, well, especially part of conformance testing, it could be sensitive. The validators record no information. There are no reports that are stored. Input data is never stored. Information about users are not stored. It's basically something that is it's a fire and forget service. It's something that is completely, well, as I said, stateless. So this is these are tools that we offer to the different communities, so allowing them to really validate their data. And as the next step, this is what we have as our full offering. It's the complete testbed, as we call it. And this is what we use for conformance testing. So we go from data validation to really testing conformance to full specifications on the basis of scenario-based test cases. So we really have administrators of different projects that define what it means to actually conform to a specification in terms of specific scenarios. Each scenario has a context. You expect it to, for example, connect your IT software, your system with a specific way. You were supposed to be using certain APIs to exchange data. The data that you're sending needs to match specific constraints, but also a specific scenario. So we might be testing with some expected data, expecting very specific responses, testing maybe with invalid messages or data to expect error messages to be generated and so forth. Now here, a contrast with the data validators is the fact that the testbed is account-based. So all users have accounts to connect with the testbed, and everything that anyone does on the testbed is tracked. So we keep full history. We record all of the different test data that is being used, all the different test sessions, and the goal of this is to allow users while they're doing their conformance testing, to actually revisit their test sessions, to review the results that they got, the different steps that took place, for their own purposes, to basically adapt, correct any issues, but also for administrators. So we have a user perspective on the testbed, which refers to the testers actually using it to do conformance testing, but then also the administrators that are using the testbed to actually have an overview over the conformance testing progress of their community, to see who is progressing, and to eventually generate reports and conformance certificates. So this was the general part of the intro, and now I'm going to dive into table schema, which is where we link to the frictionless specifications. So to do this, we're going to talk a bit about the validators that we offer. For certain specific types of syntaxes that are very commonly encountered, we offer extended support in terms of certain core validation services, basically a reusable validator core per case that we make available and can then be used to define a new validator instance on the basis purely of configuration. This is what you see here in the common architecture on the top. All are different, as I said, these validator cores. They're defined to actually provide the validation engine, which is agnostic of a specific specification, let's say, but it has the capabilities of actually validating content. It takes care of takes care of common features, common capabilities, and also implements the different APIs of the validator instances. So a web user interface and the SOAP web service API at the very least. And this forms the reusable cores that we publish as Docker images on the Docker Hub. So all of these things, they're fully usable by anyone. They're completely domain agnostic. They can be reused to set up a validator for any specification. And this is what you see here on the right. The validator instances that we actually configure, they basically build upon these validator cores to provide simply configuration. And this configuration is in the form of the validation artifacts that they used to define what actually we want to be validating the content for, and a very simple configuration file. So some settings just to manage how actually the validator is made available to users. So such reusable validator cores published as I said, Docker images on the Docker Hub, we already had previously for XML, where we use XML schema and schematron to do the validation. We had this for RDF content, where we use shackle shapes, and also for JSON content, where we use JSON schema. And now we recently added support for CSV content, using, as you've guessed it probably, table schema as the underlying means of specifying the validation artifacts. And here you see what we are doing specifically for CSV. So in the case of configuring a specific validator, as I said, we provide the same kind of simple, lightweight configuration I mentioned, and also one or more table schemas that define the different types of validations that we want to do. And in terms of the validator core, we're reusing, of course, common aspects that we share across the other types of validator cores for XML, RDF, and JSON. But the internal validation engine, this is built over the table schema Java library. So this is the library that's made available as part of the, well, from the frictionless community to validate tabular data against table schema, specifically in the case of Java as a language. Now, very specifically, we actually made a fork of this because we needed to add some stuff. We needed to fine tune a bit how certain operations took place because we wanted to match it to the kind of output that we offer from our validators. But this I can show you an example as we proceed. So this basically summarizes what we did for using table schema to implement the core validation, let's say, capability for CSV that we offer. And now really to make this more clear, I prepared, as I said, a demo for you. And as part of the demo, I'm going to start from the table schema specifications to defining a validation service and ultimately using this to show you what conformance testing using the testbed could actually mean using this. So with having said this, I'm going to switch away from my presentation and show you, well, you see something different, I hope, in the screen share. Okay, good, thumbs up. So first of all, we need a sample scenario, a sample case. And here we have a fictional case where we talk about purchase orders. So we generate CSV data for purchase orders. We call them purchase order exports, where purchase orders contain information about purchases, orders, order items, quantities, billing addresses, and so forth. So I'm going to show you now what we've defined for this. So in terms of schemas to define this CSV content, I've defined two different schemas. This is what I call the basic schema, which defines the basic requirements. It's a table schema instance, right? It defines the basic requirements of what such an export file should contain. So it defines things like addresses, shipping addresses, billing addresses, order dates, some comments, quantities, and costs. Okay, it's really sticking to the basics for the demo. But alongside this, I've also defined the second table schema. You see it's purchase order large. It's a table schema that is used to determine exports for large orders. Okay, so it's basically identical to the other schema that I showed you. The only difference is that we expect such large orders to always have, in terms of quantity, to have at least 10 items stated. Okay, this is the difference. It's just to give a bit of variety on the different things that we want to test. So we have these table schemas. I can also show you what some sample data would look like. So this is basically your well, really bare bones basic CSV file, different content, texts, dates, and so on and so forth, with the different headers as defined in the table schema. So given such kind of CSV content and the schemas, now we want to set up the validator. So as a first step, remember the validator, it only consists of the configuration that we want to specify. So we have the schemas, and to complement them, we have this very simple configuration file. So this configuration file, it basically defines what are the different types of validation that we want to support. So we want to allow validation of such an export file for basic orders and also large orders. These are the two values that you see here. Now, additionally, we define here how this validation is to take place by specifying that for each different type, so the basic and the large one, we point to the respective schema, okay, that's going to be used. Now, the rest of the stuff that you see here, this is really just some minimal configuration for the user interface. where we say that we basically give a label to the basic and large types to make it a bit more understandable to users, and we give a title to show on the validator. So this is really, I'm really touching at the very minimum amount of configuration that you would have in a validator. There's a lot more stuff that we could do, and I'm going to show you, I'm not going to go into details, of course, because we don't have time, but I'm going to show you some more complex examples as we go along. So given this configuration file and the schemas, you see that everything is linked together. So we're pointing here to the different schemas and so forth. What remains is to define our validator. So remember I said that all of this is based on, it's all Dockerized, it's all based on Docker images. So I'm defining also a Docker file here. It's basically next to these files, where even if you're not aware of how Docker works, it should be very simple to follow. So basically we are building upon the CSV validator core. So this ISITB CSV validator, this is a Docker image that captures this core CSV validator, the reusable part of the validator, and it is available publicly on the Docker Hub, okay? And what we're doing, we're basically just copying the folder, this resources folder that contains the schemas and the configuration file. We're copying them into the image, and we're basically just telling it where it is going to find this configuration. So pretty simple. So now let's create our validator. So I'm going to bring up a terminal. Now here, I basically have I'm in the folder where I have my Docker file and my resources, which are my schemas plus configuration file. And I'm going to build my image. So I'm going to first just make a poll, make sure I have the latest version of the core validator. So I have the latest one, and now I'm going to build my my image. So I'm calling this basically a PO validator, for purchase order validator, and building locally. And it's going to build the image. That's ready. And now I'm going to start up my validator. So create my validator instance. So I'm going to do a Docker, not ruin, but run. I'm going to give it the name of PO validator as well. I'm going to have it run in the background. I'm going to map its internal port. It listens on port 8080. I'm going to map it to 7070 on my local machine. And I'm going to build it over the image that I just created. This is the PO validator image you see here. Okay, so the instance is created, and just to make sure that it's running correctly, let's check the logs. Whoops, there's something there that I missed. There we are. Okay, so it's up and running, and now let's see what it looks like. So I'm switching to my Firefox. So this is this is on my local host, port 7070. Here we are, CSV order upload. So order, this is the name of the folder that we had passed into the configuration. Upload, it's just the path where the user interface lives. And CSV, it's the root path for any CSV validator. So this is the user interface of the validator that we just created. So it's really something very basic. As I said, it's something that is defined. Let's have a look at the configuration file again. It's really just this configuration here. And we have a title for it. We have the ways to provide input to it. So you can provide the content to validate using a file. So upload the file, provide the URI to load this remotely, or provide the content as a direct input. And okay, let me just try it with a sample that I have. So I'm going to use the sample file that I showed you earlier. And here I have the different validation options. And these are the two different labels that I showed before, basic and large purchase orders. So I'm going to run it for the basic case. So it's validating, and it's going to give me now the validation result. So everything is fine, success. But what is more interesting is if we get actually a couple of errors. So let me do another validation where I validate it against the large specification. So I do the same validation. And here now I see in the overview of the validation result, I see that I have a failure. I see that I have only one error. Okay, I have a very limited data set. And this, you see here details, you see exactly what is actually failing. So it's the fourth record, the total item quantity field. And you see here the message that there was a value 5 for the quantity that should at least be 10. If I click on this, you see the content that was provided with the specific error that I clicked focused upon. So you get an idea of actually what was the cause of the failure, and it is basically this 5 value here. And following this, I can also, apart from looking at the results like this online, I can download a PDF report, which basically shows you exactly the same information that you see here. So, okay, simple stuff. And you can view the report in XML. So similarly, this is an XML format. Okay, I'm not going to go into its details, but you see the basics. You get the time, failure, 1 error, and what actually failed. You see here the error reports. So now this is the user interface of the validator. But by creating the validator, we also make available a SOAP API to do the same kind of validation. So this is for machine-to-machine integrations. So you see here, I'm targeting, I've opened up my Postman instance. I'm targeting here the service. So you see, this is the same service that the validator that I just created. And we support now different operations, well, 2 basically for validators. One is an operation to provide you some, well, basically give you metadata on how the validator is supposed to be called. And the second is the actual validation call. So this is the first case. It's called get module definition request. And we're basically going to use this just to see how the validator is supposed to be called. I'll click on send. And here I should be getting the results. So this is what the results look like. It basically gives us some information about the validator. And more importantly, it tells us how this is supposed to be used. So it expects an input called content to validate, which is the CSV we want to validate. Embedding method, tells us if it's, let's say, it should be considered as a URI or as a base64 or something like that. And the validation type, which would be large or basic as we defined. So given this now, I'm going to switch to the actual validation. And here, I'm making a validate call. I'm providing as the content to validate here. I'm choosing to provide this basically as a clear, basically text as input. And this is the exact same input that I showed you before in the sample content. And I'm specifying that the validation type I want to make is large. So validated as a large set of orders. Click on send. And here I get a result where I get a validation report. Again, it's similar to the XML that you saw before. You see the date, failure, overview of the different errors, the content that was used for the validation, and also the detailed reports. So what failed and also where did it fail. So this is, let's say, line 4 of this content to validate, which is this here. Okay. So this shows you also the how you would use the validator via its SOAP API. And as I said, the configuration is very, very basic. And before I move into how we would actually use this for additional conformance testing, I'm just going to show you just as a, let's say, a screenshot, let's say, how some more complicated validators would look like. So we have online here another validator, which is one that does not have any pre-configured table schemas. And it's what we call the generic any validator, where you provide the CSV content to validate. And also you provide the table schema to validate against. And apart from the table schema, you can also provide additional settings, such as what are the delimiters, the quotes, and you can define different kinds of violations with respect to the headers. For example, if, let's say, the number of input fields does not match the number of schema fields, this could either be an error, a warning, an information message, or really just be completely ignored. So you get different flexibility like that to really make any kind of validation you want on CSV based on table schema plus additional syntax settings. Now, apart from this, a real life case that we're doing now for a specific project, it's for the Cohesio portal. I'm not going to go into details of that, what it actually is, because we don't have much time. It's a portal used basically to record projects, funding, and so on and so forth. in the EU. They have a data ingestion process that is based on CSV from that basically the member states provide, the EU member states provide, and this is the validator that is used to validate this content. You see here, this already looks a lot more elaborate. There is banners, there's text, there's links, and so forth. There's different kinds of settings that are allowed. All of this you can configure by means of such a configuration file. Okay, so really it's just to give you an idea that we can do something that's very basic or something that is even more complex. So now, having talked about validators, as a last step of the demo that I'm doing, I'm going to show you what it would look like now to do conformance testing using our validator. So here we're going to use our validator, the same instance that we built, as a building block in conformance testing scenarios. So for this, I'm switching now to my testbed instance. I have a local instance of the testbed, and this is what I called before the complete testbed platform. It is the platform that we use to actually do conformance testing. So for this to make it a bit more interesting, I'm considering that as part of this, let's say, sample demo project that we're doing to define this, CSV syntax, we're also defining different kinds of APIs to exchange such a CSV content. And here we have a case where we have IT systems that are expected to provide such content as producers and others that are expected to receive it as consumers. And we're going to be testing as a producer of such a CSV content. I've already configured this in a community that is defined as public. So I'm going to click here to register in a publicly available community. I see here the registration screen where I have the different options available, and I see the EU purchase order community, which is my case. I'm going to click it. And here I need to provide some additional information that is needed by, that has been requested by the administrator. So I'm going to give some, information. What is my organization's name? My configuration here, these are pre-configured conformance statements, as we call them, that the administrator has set up. And here there is one that is pre-configured as, mandatory, which is the purchase order producer. So I'm going to be producing such CSV data. And here I'm going to give basically some information about my own account. Now here, just a brief note. Normally in any environment that you would find of the testbed online offered by the Commission, we use EU login, which is a EU level SSO that is used for authentication. But in this case, we're using a simple configuration where we have just username passwords. Okay, so I'm going to give just some information. So I'm now connected to the testbed. I hit its landing page here, which is something that the community administrator has set up for me with some basic information. And to proceed with testing, I'm going to click on the tests button here. I have here a system that has been pre-configured for me, which is my retailing system that I'm going to click to use it for my testing. And here I see the list of conformance statements, which basically links my IT system to the specifications that I'm expected to test against. I have this EU purchase order project. You see, this is what we call the domain. The specification is this export format we've been talking about. I'm expected to act as the producer, and I have an overview here that I currently have 2 tests that I'm expected to pass, but I have not passed any. I have not executed any tests. And the overall status of my conformance testing for this specific specification is currently undefined. So I'm going to click this to proceed. I again here see a summary of what it is I'm testing against. Some configuration that we don't have to see now, but if there's any configuration that I would need to provide, it is provided in this hidden block here. And here I see the list of test cases that I'm expected to test, to basically pass. I have 2 such test cases, one where I'm expecting to send a basic file, and one where I'm expected to send a large file. Now, for each of these test cases, I can also see documentation. So this is custom documentation that has been set up for me to explain to me what it is I'm expected to do. It can contain links, images, different rich content. And I'm going to now proceed with the tests. I'm going to execute everything, actually, the entire test suite by clicking on this play button. So I come to this screen here where I'm first presented here with how I'm actually supposed to send my content to the testbed. So this is the endpoint that I'm going to use. And for this, I'm going to again use my Postman instance, and I'm going to try to put everything together on the same screen because I think it would make it more interesting. Okay, here we are. Maybe pull that. Okay, so I'm going to start my test now. I'm going to click on next. And here it shows me the first test case that I'm expected to pass. It's a simple case where I just send my export, get an acknowledgement, and this is validated. And to do this, I have this send request. Okay, it's not interesting what it actually is. It basically sends the same CSV content. It basically just posts it to the endpoint that was exposed for me. So I'm going to start my my tests. You see here, the arrow here is blue, meaning that the testbed is expecting for me to send some data. And I'm going to go here and click my send button to do this. So I'm sending this data, and you see here that messages were received. Okay, it's proceeding to the next test session, but let me go back to this. So everything, so my data was sent, I got an acknowledgement received, and I have the validation that was carried out, and a success message passed because the data validates against this first test case. And now if I go to my second test case, which is currently pending, I'm going to send the same data again. So this is received, I send back the acknowledgement, but here I get a validation failure. And in each of these steps, you can see a full report of actually what it is that was actually sent. So I can see all the information about the requests. I can see the data that was actually sent. I can see the acknowledgement that the testbed sent back to my software. I'm using here Postman as a software, but this could be an actual IT system. And I see here the validation results, where I get the same kind of display as you saw in the standalone validator. You can see the different errors that came up, the content that was validated. You can do exports and so on and so forth. So here we've executed 2 tests. And of course, I can come back, I can re-execute until I actually pass my conformance statement. And I can revisit my test sessions to see, for example, what I've executed in the past, and see any results from those different sessions that passed. And this is the kind of information, but with much more controls for monitoring and reporting that the administrator would also see, to actually see how the different community members are progressing with their conformance testing. So I think I'm going to stop the demo here. I hope it showed you it gave you a good idea of starting from the spec, going to a validator, and then actually using that validator in the testbed for something that is more like full conformance testing that I showed you here. And I'm going to switch back to my presentation with this. Let me just close that and go full screen again. So everything I talked about in my presentation, so the generic CSV validator that I talked to you about, where you provide arbitrary CSV content and a table schema for the validation, you can access it here. Also, you can access the Cohesio project validator. And also, this is an extra validator that I'm mentioning here. We defined also a validator for table schema itself. So you can validate your table schema definitions against the table schema JSON schema specification. Okay, I didn't show you this, but if you want to try it out, the link is here, so you can definitely follow it. Now, the last point here is that we have, of course, a detailed documentation on all of this, and this is the link that's provided here. So please do use this as a reference. And just to give you a sneak peek of what this actually looks like, this is the kind of documentation that you would see. So we have really a step-by-step guide that really guides you through the process of defining a validator, in this case for CSV, but of course, feel free to browse the other cases and basically replicate the kind of scenario that I just demoed for you here. So, and with this, I think I'm going to close. The last slide I have here, it's really references for you to find more information about the testbed, about what we do, releases, news, all the documentation links. You can access our online environment that is hosted by Digit, and we have demos there that you can play with. And of course, if you have any questions, feedback, and so forth, feel free to drop us an email at our functional mailbox here.